Hey everyone, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Today it is the 23rd of October, 2022. And on today's show, we take a look back at the weekend that was in the Big 12, a wild weekend with Oklahoma State and TCU getting big wins. Baylor gets back on track, and Texas Tech thumps West Virginia. All that and more coming up on today's show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Thank you guys for making us a part of your day. We are brought to you today by Sling TV. Make sure you guys check them out today. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're on the way to 2,500 subscribers right now, trying to get there in the next week by the end of October. So help us out and subscribe to the channel today. Like the videos, leave us your comments. I am not a Texas Tech fan. They just had a nice win this weekend, so we are wearing the shirt, and I haven't worn it too much this season. If you're new to the show, I wear all the Big 12 apparel supporting the teams, except for those two traitors, Texas and OU, not wearing their gear on this program. So this was, once again, like this weekend, the best game in the entire country, maybe the best two games. You stack up Kansas State and TCU, plus also the Texas and Oklahoma game, or Texas-Oklahoma State game. We're in the Big 12 Conference, another weekend where it delivers just fascinating contests. And the thing about it is, that's why this league being so even is awesome for the regular season. In a year where we're not talking about the playoff as much, and I say the Royal Week because I also work over at SiriusXM in that capacity, like the playoff conversations we are having are not as many. Now, those will heat up here soon as we get later on into the season. But those playoff conversations, I think, have been dulled by some of the amazing action that we've gotten this year. And I think a really good example of that is the Tennessee-Alabama game last week. Now, those two teams factor into it, but just kind of the enjoyment of it all, right? TCU, Oklahoma State and Texas, Kansas and TCU, right? Stories like this have resonated across the country that do not necessarily have all of the playoff implications, have been really exciting and fun to watch. And also the matchups in this conference deliver, right? Oregon versus UCLA was an awesome game between two teams who deserved the spotlight yesterday. But what happened? Man, Oregon, how impressive were they yesterday? What a win. But when the top teams in that league meet, it's not always always get the fireworks, right? When the top teams in this league meet, or really anybody in this league meets almost sometimes, but not the case all over yesterday, it's just bangers every single week. It's fantastic matchups, fun games, thrilling endings. It's the whole 9 yards every single week, from West Virginia, against Baylor last week to, Baylor, Kansas this week, to Kansas, TCU against Oklahoma State, to Oklahoma State against Texas, right? I mean, it's all thrilling all the way through. And that happened yesterday. And we got to start with that headliner. Well, I think the Texas game was the better game. TCU does it again. They come from behind, this time an 18-point deficit, and they end up winning this game 38-24 is the final score. Sorry, I've got the Texas game, the Texas Longhorns game pulled up right now on my screen. But anyway, Kansas State gets that win from coming all the way from behind. And the 38-28 was the final there. And it kind of brings up this question about that I threw it out there on Twitter last night about like what's making TCU so good. And I hate to do this, but we have to do this now. All right. About, is TCU lucky or is TCU really good? And also there's always middle ground. So it can be a combination of both. And here's the explanation for this. All right. So in any sport, luck is always involved, especially in football when you have an oval, weird shaped ball that, has 2 points in the end and bounces weirdly. Okay. But notice how we always think luck goes the way of the really great teams. All right. There's a reason for that, because really great teams take advantage of the luck. Last year, Alabama loses the Iron Bowl to Auburn if Tank Bigsby just stays in bounds, right? He goes out of bounds and stops the clock and gets Alabama the ball back. If Bigsby stays in bounds, that game's basically over. And there's no Bryce Young final drive, at least in my opinion, right? Earlier this year, you could argue the luck side of things on TCU side, right? The non-hold call in the end of the Kansas game. them knocking Dylan Gabriel out of the game, right? Adrian Martinez here goes out of the game. But here's the thing about TCU, and this happens everywhere, man. The great people, the great teams, whatever it is, when you give them that inch, when you give them that window, they go and they take the mile. They go and they take in this case, 100 yards or the 7 points or whatever it is you're spotting them. Guess what, guys? Yesterday, yeah, those calls again went for Clemson in that game. It sucked, but guess who stuck it out and ended up winning the game? Clemson. There are some times where luck goes against teams, and also you can see them, you can see them win it. I think Oklahoma State yesterday got really unlucky with the injuries, but you saw them stick that one out. All right. Yes, these teams are getting injured constantly when they play TCU. Was the Jamoy Hodge hit dirty? Yeah, I think it was. I think that Jamoy Hodge hit on Dylan Gabriel was dirty. Not all of them are dirty, though. Not all of them have been dirty. This is a league now, guys, where 8 separate teams have had to use their backup quarterback at some point this year, and some of them more than just a backup, right? Texas Tech, now Kansas State, have had to go way down the depth chart to get guys out there because of quarterback injuries. It is part of the game. TCU's case, it's really worked out in their favor. But when you give TCU that inch, they take a mile. There's a reason, and just this on this point, everybody being injured. Guys, there's a reason why in these games, when guys are going down, it's happened weeks and weeks in a row now. It happened with Kansas, against TCU. It happened with Oklahoma against TCU. It happened with Oklahoma State against TCU. It happened with Oklahoma State. We just saw yesterday, Kansas State against TCU. It continues to happen. Whose players, though, are standing tall? And I asked Gabe Eicher, my colleague at SiriusXM, about this last night. I said, Gabe, is there something to this? Is there some dirty element here that I'm not missing? And he said, no, it's not that they're dirty. This team is built a little bit different in a year where it's a tough league to play in, guys, when everything's so up and down and there's a lot of points being scored. And there's a lot of skill on the field. And look at the skill that we have in a lot of these teams, from Texas to Oklahoma to TCU to Oklahoma State, everywhere in between. We got skilled players on all of these football teams. Okay. And I think more so than a lot of other leagues, right? You go and you look at leagues, you say like maybe the ACC, right? There is not like surefire, talented Sunday players on every single team. Xavier Hutchinson is an All-American candidate at wide receiver on the worst team in the league right now, and there's no doubt about his bona fides. That guy's a Sunday player. Okay, it's different in this league. It's tough to keep up, but when you see all of these teams dealing with injuries and a lot of them getting banged up when you play TCU, some of you all might think that they're a dirty team. When I see that, I think they're tougher than everybody else. And look, I hate to be like, these guys are not injured. You're injured. You're not tough. No, but these guys are physically mauling people. Look at their running stats. Look how TCU runs the football. They've got multiple guys this year averaging over 6 yards a carry heading into this week. Why do you think that is? It's because they're blocking up front really well. They've got good aggressive runners. Kendrick Miller, man, has developed into a really spectacular back. Maybe I missed it last year because, Zach Evans was on and off kind of ahead of him. But what a player he's developed into, right? I mean, you look at him and DeMercado's run well. Max Duggan has always run well. If you've watched him, and running the football has never been the Max Duggan problem. All right. Their defense, might give it up at times. They force some big turnovers. They hit you hard. Not always the cleanest defense. Not going to act like those guys have been clean all year long. But guess what? Like, they're playing, as much as you can within the rules. And like, if guys are getting ejected when they should be getting ejected, and they're hanging in games, and their defense is getting stops in the second half. This is the way it works, man. Life's not fair. And if you start pouting or crying or whatever, TCU is going to run over you. Will Howard, all credit to him. They did what they had to do yesterday. Because if he doesn't play as well as he did, and that defense doesn't stand up the way it did in the end of the middle portion of the first half, this game is much worse than a 10-point game. It is much, much worse than a 10-point game. Because even with that, TCU scores at the end of the half. Then they get the ball back at the start of the second half, score again. They're getting stops. They're forcing turnovers. They keep scoring. They keep putting it up. And honestly, it could have been worse. Kansas State's defense kind of held on there towards the back end, despite the fact that they gave up 3 extra possessions there with all the interceptions that they were throwing. And on the other side of this, like the injury stuff, guys, it's an excuse, sure. But Oklahoma State yesterday, there were no excuses. They were playing a bunch of guys that hadn't played a whole lot at wide receiver Jason Taylor makes the interception and gets injured and has to go out and has a really awful injury there. We'll get to that game in a second, but come on, folks. This is part of the game. And some teams like Oklahoma State, who was collapsed last week, showed the mental fortitude to persevere through it. And they were tougher, better coach team, despite the fact they had a bunch of guys in the end of that game who had not played a whole lot of minutes. They had Shetron get concussed in the first half. It's a kid who hadn't played a ton because they're so thin at wide receiver. Other kids step up and do something about it. And so while it's a valid excuse, like the football goes on, we keep playing, and TCU is going to keep knocking that door over and run your ass over unless you do something about it. They're too good not to. Like, that's the thing about it. Sure, is there some luck? But whenever you give them luck, what happens? Guess what? Max Duggan lost the job. He lost the job, and he got lucky for his football future because Chandler Morris got hurt. And guess what happened? He's not giving the job back because he's been tremendous. And like, it's really, somebody's always on the wrong side of luck. And in this case, it's Chandler Morris, and it sucks for that kid. But guess what? TCU football keeps going on. They keep rolling. They've rolled through the schedule now. They're 7-0. This is not a lucky football team. This is a really good football team that when they get lucky shows you how good they are. That's the example of this is Jalen Daniels fumbles on the 1-yard line against TCU. What does TCU do? They take the ball 99 yards in just mere minutes, because that's what happens when you give a team that goes, you shouldn't have done that, and you give us the football, and we're confident in our guys right now, and we're going to move the rock all over your ass, all right? So save this. Like, yeah, they're lucky, but guess what? If Desmond Jackson cuts it up a little bit earlier, Baylor's not the Big 12 champions. They're lucky Desmond Jackson didn't do that last year against them in the Big 12 title game. He didn't, though. And guess what? Baylor's Big 12 champions. I ain't going to take it from him. So when TCU's in Arlington at the end of the year and people are trying to lament the first half and the injuries and whatnot, shove it, man. I don't care. This team is awesome. And I'll tell you what, every win for them is one more knock against wherever I had them in the preseason poll. 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, come on. This team from like the top down, look, their defense is not very good, but guess what they did in the second half yesterday? You put a bunch of bad passes around, and they forced a bunch of turnovers and put their team in a good position. They win the football game. And last week, Oklahoma State didn't finish drives off. They didn't do a good enough job. Defense played well enough, and guess what? TCU makes you pay once again. You didn't score a touchdown, double overtime. Guess what? TCU made you pay again. All right, guys. If you do not bring your A game for 60 minutes, it's nearly impossible to beat these guys because they're so talented. And this, once again, is a credit to GP. They're so talented that in a competitive Big 12 like this year, when there's not as many big dogs and teams are banged up, they have the luxury of flipping that switch. They can flip the switch. I'm not sure every other team in this league can. I thought Texas might be able to be the flip that switch team. We want to get it done. We can. They're not all the way there yet. They're not all the way to being that team. TCU, though, I mean, they're turning in some really crappy first 20 to 30 minutes of football games, and they're coming up roses in the end of the game because they're making halftime adjustments. They just come out with a different confidence second half. There's a stay the course element to it. They know they can run the football at you. They know they've got weapons. I mean, look at the kind of dispersal of the passes yesterday. This dispersal of the weapons that we had yesterday. And Kendra Miller deserves a ton of credit because I thought everything, and the offensive line too. I thought everything Kendra did in the running game, the offensive line did in the running game, like it always does. It all sets it all up. And the fact they can run the football like they want to and they want to is awesome. But Quentin Johnson gets touchdown and blown coverage there. Jared Wiley gets in the end zone. Darius Davis, 1 for 65. And you saw him go. He's a house call. It is a house call for that guy. they're hitting all the weapons. And we're not even talking much about Tay Barber, who had 2 for 27 in this game as well. This team, once again, balance all over the place on offense, a defense that if they can get it right at certain times, Joe Gillespie can kind of get them all organized. If they give them 30 good minutes, they can almost beat everybody they need to in this league. It's really impressive to watch. For Kansas State, I feel very unfortunate for them because I thought that was going to be a fantastic football game. Kansas State was a bad matchup, I thought, in the beginning of this for TCU, and they started off really well. After the injury, Will Howard looked really strong, but Will Howard, guys, like he threw a couple ducks in the first half too. Not all those passes that were all over the place were really great. This was another one of those performances. This is one of those situations where, like you can't just give the ball to Deuce and hope it works. And they weren't. To start off, they were not. That's why they got a 28-10 advantage. But it just was too much to overcome. That they couldn't maintain possession of the football the way that you thought they would and the way that they normally can when Adrian Martinez is in the game. That's the big difference, right? Could Kansas State play more of the old Kansas State? Because here's the thing. Like, I know they wanted to be faster, but when you look at that game yesterday and you talk about you talk about like what strategy would have worked later on, going slower and choking the life out of that game would have been the best course of action. Sure, it would have been relatively close still, but the fact that they can run the ball, and it's not like conservative running because, Martinez sometimes pass play and he just tucks it and goes. They've got a lot of dynamic things they can do. Obviously, RPO, they got the read option that they've got. They can do all counter power. They can run the whole series over there at Kansas State with both the quarterback and the running back. They can do that effectively. They could not do it in this game because they didn't have that guy, Adrian Martinez, there. And look, Will Howard as a passer looked you could even argue at certain times, like the passes weren't great, but like the production was better than Martinez has looked as a passer at times. But when he's got the functional passing game working in the running game, it is just a different offense. So did Kansas State get very unlucky? Sure. But what did TCU do to respond after getting kind of, messing around for a bit? Like, Kansas State had the injury, TCU messes around, and then they still end up winning the game anyway. It's just kind of where I am on that. So we'll see. And look, Kansas State fans, y'all were on the wrong side of it this week. The injury bug, I actually think it's going to benefit you next week because guess who's coming to town? Oklahoma State. And they are all kinds of banged up right now. So there's something to watch on that front. But once again, TCU legit, we're going to get more to TCU later this week and talk about the future of them because, and the future, I mean, this season, because there is some attainable things now that we have to talk about. You guys know what I mean? 3 letters. And they have an F, a P, and a C in them in some different order. All right. Oklahoma State rallies past Texas. So Quinn Ewers, just horrendous. Absolutely horrendous in this game. That was the first thing that stuck out to me. Texas did not lose. I want to say, despite that, Texas did not lose this football game as much as everybody will tell you they did. Oklahoma State had to, strap up, pull those pants up. They had to tighten the belt. They had to get back to work in this game, and they did. For a team that it cannot run the football to save their lives, to be quite frank. And they didn't do it. They did not do a very good job running the football in this game. I have to mention. They put it all on their quarterback's shoulders, and except once, he really got the job done in this game. And so did the defense the second half. Spencer Sanders has to throw the ball 57 times this game. We think he's injured. And it sounds like he's injured. Didn't practice all week. 57 times for 391, 2 scores, and a really bad red zone pick. My God, it was a bad red zone pick. But I mentioned this before, and I want to mention this again. The guys' names that are all over the stat sheet, and Dominic Richardson played for a lot, but he had to go out. We had to see Jaden Nixon, Ollie Gordon, who I thought made very good accounts of themselves in their debut. Bryson Green is somebody that we've been talking about all season, but the sophomore had the game of his life in this, or at least this point, in a big moment. 5 for 133 and a touchdown. Stephen Johnson Jr., Stephon Johnson Jr., comes out of nowhere, and he's one of those guys. I mentioned Talon Shetron was in the game earlier. They targeted Shetron early, and he gets concussed, and they have to lose him in this game. And I mean, they got guys, Presley fighting out there, John Paul Richardson fighting out there. All of these guys have been banged up. And the second end, the back end, I mentioned before, they get the Jason Taylor interception, and then he goes out. This team just kept fighting and scratching and clawing. And after their defense just gets railroaded in the first half, they bounce back in a meaningful way. 3 for 17 were the Longhorns on third down in this game. 19 for 49 in the passing game for Texas. 3 interceptions thrown. They committed 14, and this is where the game is won or lost, 14 penalties for 119 yards. I know that Oklahoma State play-by-play man Dave Hunziker made the comment about this after the game was over. I had the radio on. And it was something to the effect of, like, the difference in this game, one of these teams is a winning program and one of these teams is not. And I thought about that, and I was wondering, like, do I think that is all the way fair to Texas? In some ways, yes. I think in some ways, as a whole, not necessarily Steve Sarkisian, this is still where Texas is, right? And think back to the game in Stillwater or in Austin last year. Texas is on their way in that first half to taking a 3-score lead. Guess what happens? Pick 6. The game turns around. I don't think they're that group anymore. I think they showed the fortitude in that Iowa State game. They were right. It's a game they won last year. But they're not quite there yet to punch up against Oklahoma State. I'd say, well, Oklahoma State's, they're a top 15 team, sure, and people call them a fraudulent top 10 team. But the thing is, they are one of the unicorns, not the unique team, but they're one of the unique teams in college football in terms of the way the program is built, with the stability at head coach. And yes, he's flirted with other places. Mike Gundy has, but he's remained there. And the consistency of 8, 9, and 10 win seasons when they have guys, think about all they lost on the defense, and they lost a coordinator who, worked Bobby Carpenter the other day, who's a former Ohio State player. He said everybody loves Jim Knowles, and they said he's the real deal. Yeah, we all knew this, and they tried to keep him. They couldn't. It's hard to compete with those athletes and that kind of money. But guess what? Derek Mason comes in, and guess what, man? You can move the ball on this defense, but guess what happened? They gave up 31 first half points. They gave up 3 in the second half. 3 for 17 on third down with a bunch of different guys. I think Mason Cobb's going to be a star. That guy's all over the field. I know they lost a couple linebackers, obviously, in the NFL last year. Devin Harper, and they lose Rodrigo, too. Malcolm Rodriguez. And Mason Cobb is trying to fill a void. I think he's on his way, man. I think he's on his way. He really is on his way. He's a really good player, really fun player to watch. And for them to put that performance up in the second half, because it wasn't like the third quarter was money. I mean, they ended up, they have 10, 14, 3, and then the fourth quarter, they had 14 points. Oklahoma State did. So for them to kind of, it was on their defense. And when the game was this close, like the fact that they had no penalties and they had that many young guys playing, sure, they could have been called penalties at times, sure, whatever. But when you go 14-0, like, I'll even spot you 4 one way. Let's just say you give them 12 penalties on one side and 2 on the other, right? 4 penalty swing. Still 10 more. It's still going to be around 100 yards more, in somewhere in that range. That was the difference, because one of these programs, like I talked about, is used to winning. And Texas has the talent. I don't think they're done this year. I really don't think they're done this year in terms of how the season's going to be. Big 12 championship. Yeah, it's going to be tough. Right, when you have the losses now, well, they only have 2 conference losses to Texas Tech, and that's not going to hurt them tiebreaker-wise. But Oklahoma State, man, it appears they think that they're going to be there at the end of the year. We'll see if they can do that. We'll see if they can remain at the end of the year with all the injuries they've suffered. But for Texas, to have the team that ran the football, I thought, as well as they did in that first half, and to have it go as poorly as it did in the second, they didn't run the football enough in that second half. It was upsetting to watch. It was really upsetting to watch from a, like, this team should be better perspective, because, when we talk about these football teams, we always talk about their trajectory and how the paths change. And for all these fan bases, I mean, Oklahoma and Texas more less so, but like for a lot of us, the leftover fan base in the Big 12, I want to see progression. it's what makes Iowa State and West Virginia situations right now so frustrating is that there's a lack of upward progression. You want to see that for those teams and those fan bases, right? For Texas, you're just not seeing it. And it's frustrating because they can't do it. Now, on the other side of this, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but this was Quinn Ewers' first road game as a college quarterback. Remember, he played his first full 4 quarters as a college quarterback last week against that's the first time he's played a full 4 quarters. This was the first true road test that he has had. All right. And he failed. He failed miserably. You hope that he learns from it, but he did fail miserably in this game. And I thought he might have been, I said Oklahoma State plus 6.5, but I had a bit more faith in Quinn Ewers, right? I had a bit more faith in what it would look like. I was wrong for that. I was wrong for putting that much on him that early. But they were spreading the ball around, moving around in the first half, and then the running the ball really well was a big thing too. Gosh darn, Bijan Robinson was. I mean, like it sucks because he's gonna be gone next year, and I think that I know he's got all the endorsement deals and whatnot, but when you talk about him as a player, as a guy, like whenever we talk to him on Big 12 radio, he is a fantastic human being. It appears, and a really great teammate. And you really know that like yesterday, a bunch of them went to the locker room to sing after when Eyes of Texas were playing. He was still out there, and there really wasn't a whole lot of everybody around him. And you think about like, man, that guy just wanted to do so much for the Texas program, and I don't think he could bring everything that they wanted there. But like they just aren't all the way there. And he was fantastic yesterday. Touchdown was fantastic. In the receiving touchdown, he had a 41-yard touchdown. They ride this guy a ton, man. I wanted their offense to be more diverse, but it's hard not to give this guy the football, and they didn't do it much in the end of the game. But 24 for 140 and a touchdown, including a long of 42. Roschon Johnson had a 53-yard touchdown run as well. And they just got away with that. I mean, five rushes for Roschon Johnson, and you threw the ball 50 times. Like, there's a better way to get. I know in the end of the game you got to throw it, sure, but like, man, we could have arrived at that destination a little bit faster. So this game, as you guys can tell, it's fried my brain with the way it went down and everything. But Oklahoma State, I thought they were on the rocks with how injured they've been, and the fact that last week they blow that game. To see the mental fortitude and come back, it's about the players too, but like that's a mentality thing. That's a coaching thing. It's a quarterback. It's like a leadership thing. You cannot say enough good things about where they are with that. And we'll see next week if they can get any healthier. It sounds like Jason Taylor is walking around the boot right now. So we'll see what happens on that front. But man, is that a contest? And I think Oklahoma State preserve themselves still in this Big 12 title hunt, thanks to that gutsy performance yesterday. The Texas Tech Red Raiders thump West Virginia. Texas Tech fan got at me on Twitter. A lot of fans have been getting at me on Twitter. Kansas State and Texas Tech. You guys have reason to be upset with me. I sold y'all short, man. I sold y'all short. In a conference where it's been a lot of back and forth, I thought with the injuries happening at quarterback right now, this was trending towards a situation where it would be a back and forth game. And I did take the quarterback I trusted more in JT Daniels. They made him uncomfortable. And I have to tell you guys, Baron Morton is, he appears to be the genuine article. This kid yesterday, 28 for 45, 325 and 2 touchdowns. Thought Taj Brooks and Sir Roderick Thompson contributed well in the running game, especially Taj Brooks. A bit more running the football than we saw. I think they wanted to take a bit more of the tough, I guess, a little more of the plate, the offensive load, I guess you should say, off of the plate of Baron Morton. There you go. This thing got so bad, though, that Donovan Smith got to come in and relieve. We weren't like 2 quarterbacks played, but not because of injury, which is a great thing to see. And to see them like rely on Brooks, and I think Brooks scored the first touchdown in this game, to see them rely on Brooks and Thompson, who combined for 3 touchdowns on the ground and over 160 rushing yards, with a young quarterback. And then also another guy like Xavier White was a running back and then getting a wide receiver, 8 for 139 and 1 score. I love that. I love the fact that they're using these veteran guys with this young, really talented quarterback, and he's leaning on them. He's relying on them. And they battered them. This game felt like it was over. It was 17-3 at halftime, but they never let West Virginia get back close. At 20, they scored 14 straight points in the third quarter before West Virginia cut that thing back to 21. And then in the fourth quarter, they ended up scoring another 17 points. This thing was really never that close in the end of this game. So, I think this is a game on the West Virginia side where you have to ask, this is where you start to ask yourself a lot of questions. You bounced back last week. And this week you let a really bad defense really beat your ass in a pretty meaningful way. I said earlier in the year, I thought West Virginia was going to be 1 up, 1 down, right? And win one, lose one, but I thought they could start trying to turn the corner. They just aren't able to. They had the 2-game winning streak, but they have not had a 2-game winning streak against Power 5 teams, right? After the KU loss, they beat Towson 65-7. They thumped Virginia Tech 33-10. And they have that bad loss to Texas, the 43-40 win over Baylor, and now a 48-10 loss. It's just up and down. And look, it's, if they can find that money for Neil Brown, I think it's time to pull the trigger on that. That is becoming an untenable situation. It's not good. They're not consistent. They have no identity. Running the football for them has been something they've been able to do very well so far this season. Not in this game. 26 carries for 73 yards, 2.8 per carry, 3 interceptions this game. JT Daniels, he was horrible in this game. They didn't do a great job for helping him out up front, I thought, either. And this was, and once again, like, it wasn't like they were in his face like the entire day, but they were able to get back in the backfield. Marquise Waters had a really nice game too. 3 different guys have interceptions. So for Texas Tech, like, just really hard to beat. And for West Virginia, it just feels like we kind of know where this is going. But one more note on Tech. Like I said this before, I'll say it again. If you beat Texas Tech, you are good. Or at least you were good that day, I should say, right? Because we never know how you play week to week. But like, they are an extremely tough out. We saw that with their win over NC State, Houston. I mean, you just go down the list of their games. They're really tough out. The teams can't put them away. And now next week, 7:30 on ESPN2, I think them versus Baylor is super compelling because it's a Joey McGuire Bowl. All right, one more game to get to here. Baylor rebounds against Kansas. Kansas is starting so slow, and they're having to climb out of these massive holes. And Kansas is not the only team I'd mentioned before, like, dealing with all of these injuries. They're not the only team out there, but they're just not at the point yet where they've got all the depth in the world to deal with a full season and a conference that can be really difficult to play in, right? They're just not there yet. And their defense looks slow. They're not getting after people as much. I got a couple guys, obviously, but this game yesterday, the Baylor game, it started off, it was a blowout, right? And we're at halftime, it's 28-3. This thing ends up 35-23. And look, Kansas got this thing down to a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. So credit to Baylor for holding on, or, credit for them fighting back. Credit to Baylor for holding on. But, 288 total yards of offense just ain't going to get the job done. And the one thing they were really good at was rushing the football, KU, them being KU. And the reason I think a big part of that is, number one, Daniel Highshaw's out, which is tough. Number two, this is the big one, Jalen Daniels. Jason Bean, guys, is faster than Jalen Daniels. They show it during every broadcast. He is a track star. He was a track star. Probably could still be if he wanted to do it. Right? He is lightning fast. He does not have the wiggle, the hips, the lateral movement that Jalen Daniels had. That's what made Jalen Daniels so good, was his ability to make guys miss, to change directions, to accelerate. Being, when he runs, guys, it's not one of those things where, and look, he's a sprinter, so it makes sense. Like, you're not sprinting and changing directions normally. You sprint linearly. So, like, he's one of those guys that once he turns the corner, he's good. But the corner for him is a bit more of an oval, right? Jalen Daniels is a guy who, he zigzags. He makes the corners himself. He cuts. He's not as fast going in that one direction, but he's faster making the cut to the other direction. And that's what's different about this rush. When you take out a guy like a Daniel Highshaw. And also, when you fall this far behind, you have to throw a lot more. Devin Neal had 10 carries. Jason Bean had 8, right? Savion Morrison had 2. Okay. I don't know if Kai Thomas Dow didn't see him out there. 20 rushes. He threw the ball 27 times. And they had to throw the ball more because they fell behind in this game. Now, credit them for forcing some turnovers. They definitely did a better job in the second half of this game. They only allowed 7 points. But they put themselves in such a hole that made it hard for them to get back. So Kansas, like you can just see it. They look more like the team at the end of last year than they did the team in the first half of this year. They need to find a combination of both to get themselves, to win number 6 in the year and get them bowl eligible, because that's really what we want to see. We need to see KU in a bowl game. Need that badly. For Baylor, I'm not sure what to make of this, other than to say maybe this is just a continuation of who they are, right? Good for part of it. Bad, they ran all. They were getting chunks and chunks and chunks and chunks and chunks. They could run anything they wanted in that first half. So credit to you building up a 28-3 lead. Your defense played fantastic, getting off the field, all that kind of stuff. Richard Reese also. That kid's got Richard Reese. He's going to have a chance. He's going to have a chance to be a special player. Passing game, not as dynamic. Blake Shapen, 17 for 26 for 164. Not as sharp in this game as I thought he needed to be, especially later on. And so this Baylor team, even I've said this a million times, say it again, is just not as good as preseason expectations, but they are not coming along the way we thought. This might be, guys, a 6-6 football team. And honestly, it could be worse. Baylor might win. Here's the rest of the schedule, folks. At Texas, at OU, K-State, TCU, at Texas. Once again, at Tech, at OU, Kansas State, TCU, at Texas. If you go 2-3, it's not bad in that stretch, guys. I think we're looking at a team in Baylor that might be lucky to be bowl eligible. Do they have a skill to be bowl eligible? Sure, they should be. This team should go to a bowl game. It's just not coalescing for this group. And I'll tell you what. Is that a horrible thing? No, because think about the 2020 season with Dave Aranda and how that went. He was able to make sure things got turned around in 2021. Look what happened. And he's getting a lot of these guys back. Now, I know they're going to lose a lot of guys in the lines. They have to work with that. But these skill players, they've got so much speed and so much ability that they might be able to neutralize some of the struggles if they even have them at the offensive line position still with Jeff Grimes and Eric Mateos there. So I think they've got a chance still. And obviously Ron Roberts and what he and Dave Aranda do on defense normally is very good. So I'm not panicking. And once again, I thought this group could be really good next year. Well, later on in the season and into next year. They're not where they're supposed to be yet, but I'm not thinking that last year was an aberration at all. And you're glad to get a win anytime you can. And Kansas continues to be frisky. The spread was 10.5. They were lost by 12. Think about it like that, guys. They're 5-0-1 or 5-1-1 against the spread. Now they're one. They pushed last week. Their one miss now was by 1.5. All right, so they're keeping these games competitive. They're keeping them in the range that they should. But Baylor, to me, it's just you see it at times. They can move the football, they can score, and then Blake Shapen makes some bad mistakes, and then the defense, things get a little loose. It was funny to see that touchdown pass Jason Bean threw yesterday in real time. He points. You could see it mentally going through it because the guy was so open and throws it downfield. They got a lot to work on, this Baylor team does. Not saying to give up, not saying the season's over, but I think there's a lot to look for in these last 5 games of the season to take moving forward. All right, guys, that was a long show, I know, but there was just so much football to get to, so I don't mind going over longer than normal. Make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at LOBig12. You guys can find me at @JoshNeighbors_. Face a little red, shirts red. Time to watch some NFL football. I hope you guys are enjoying your Sunday. Once again, please subscribe, comment. Let us know what your thoughts are about this weekend's action league moving forward. We have episodes here 5 and normally actually 6 days a week here on Locked On Big 12. So make sure you guys check them all out. Till next time, my friends, as always, stay safe.